Racist cop punches black woman. CIA credentials instantly end him. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main characters. Officer Jake Thompson was the kind of cop who blended into the crowd. He had the look of a typical law enforcement officer, sharp uniform, clean-shaven face, and an air of authority that was hard to ignore. For years, he had worked his way up in the force, building a reputation of someone who followed the rules. Or at least, that's what the public believed. His colleagues knew him as a competent officer, but not much more. There was one thing about Jake, though, that was far from ordinary. What no one knew was that he held credentials that gave him access to some of the most secretive corners of the government. Yes, Jake wasn't just a police officer. He had ties to the CIA, a fact that few people were aware of. These credentials, though, were supposed to be a symbol of trust and responsibility. Yet in Jake's hands, they became a ticket to a darker side of the system. On the surface, Jake seemed like just another officer doing his job. But underneath, there was something more. A seed of prejudice had quietly taken root in his heart over the years, and it was only a matter of time before it would spill over into his actions. Tasha Williams, on the other hand, was the complete opposite of Jake. She was a woman who had always stood up for what was right, a proud, strong black woman who had no problem speaking out when something wasn't right. She had lived through struggles, fought for justice, and had no patience for people who stood in the way of equality. That fateful afternoon, Tasha found herself in a situation she never saw coming. As she was driving home from work, she was pulled over by none other than Officer Jake Thompson. At first, everything seemed routine. He asked for her license and registration, and she handed them over with a smile, thinking it would be just another quick stop. But something in Jake's eyes wasn't right. His demeanor was colder than usual, more distant. And then, without warning, the situation took a turn. The small talk quickly escalated, and before she knew it, Tasha was on the receiving end of an unjust confrontation. She couldn't quite put her finger on what made it feel different, but there was an intensity to the situation that she hadn't experienced before. Little did she know, the man standing before her wasn't just a cop. He was someone with a past that could change everything. As Tasha Williams stood there, a slight unease settled in her chest. Officer Jake Thompson was asking her questions, but there was something off about the way he was speaking. His tone was colder than she expected, and his eyes seemed to linger a little too long on her face. She tried to keep her composure, thinking it was just another routine stop. She had been pulled over before, and each time, she handled it calmly, politely, hoping it would be over quickly. But this time, something didn't feel right. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, trying to read the situation, but Jake's behavior was making her feel like she was under a microscope. The conversation wasn't about speeding or any typical traffic violation. Instead, it seemed to shift, almost as if he were digging into her background, her history, her very identity. Tasha's mind raced, wondering why he seemed so interested in her. Why was he asking about her family, her job, even the neighborhood she lived in? She could feel her nerves start to tighten. As the questions continued, Tasha tried to maintain her calm, but inside, she felt a surge of anxiety. She didn't know what was happening, but it was beginning to feel more like an interrogation than a simple traffic stop. Officer Thompson seemed to be testing her responses, watching her closely as if he were waiting for a mistake. Despite her discomfort, Tasha knew she had to stay composed. She had faced worse situations in her life and had learned to keep her emotions in check. However, the deeper she went into this conversation, the more she felt like something was about to go wrong. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jake's questioning slowed down. He stood there for a moment, looking at her through the window, before slowly walking back to his patrol car. Tasha's hands still gripped the steering wheel, her heart racing as she tried to understand what had just happened. She had no idea why Officer Thompson had been so focused on her, But she knew one thing for sure. The situation wasn't over. She could feel it. Her instincts were telling her something was off, that there was more to this encounter than she realized. A few moments later, Jake returned to her car. Tasha's breath caught in her throat. She tried to prepare herself for whatever was coming next, but she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something deeper was at play here. Officer Thompson handed her back her license and registration without a word, but as he did, there was something almost rehearsed about the way he moved. His voice was steady when he gave his final instructions, but there was no warmth in his words. "Drive safe," he said, his eyes avoiding hers. Tasha nodded, still trying to make sense of the encounter. As she drove away, her mind was spinning. She couldn't understand why this had happened, but she had the distinct feeling that her meeting with Officer Jake Thompson wasn't the last time their paths would cross. "I don't know how long I can keep doing this," Tasha Williams thought to herself as she sat at her kitchen table, her fingers absently tracing the rim of her coffee cup. The encounter with Officer Jake Thompson had left her with more questions than answers. What had really happened that day? Why had he been so focused on her? The more she replayed the incident in her mind, the more uncomfortable she became. There was something hidden beneath the surface, something she couldn't quite grasp. But one thing was clear, this wasn't over. It had barely started. A few days later, Tasha found herself unable to shake the memory of that encounter. She had tried to focus on her work, her community, and her family, but no matter what she did, she couldn't push the feeling away. It gnawed at her. Was this just another example of a routine stop gone wrong? Or was there more to it? What was it that made Jake act so strange? Her curiosity had transformed into something more, a sense of urgency. She needed to know the truth. She couldn't just let this go. Tasha made a decision that afternoon. She was going to do some digging. She wasn't the kind of person who backed down from a challenge, and if there was something hidden in that encounter, she was going to find it. Her first stop was the police station. She knew the chances of getting any solid information from them were slim, but she had to try. She approached the front desk, her resolve firm. "I need to speak with someone about an officer who pulled me over recently," she told the receptionist. "Officer Jake Thompson." The receptionist gave her a look, one that suggested she wasn't the first person to ask about this officer. "Please wait here," the woman said before disappearing into the back. Tasha sat in the sterile waiting area, her fingers tapping nervously against her leg. Her mind raced. What if they didn't take her seriously? What if she was just another complaint, another voice drowned out by the system? Her thoughts were interrupted when a senior officer entered the room. "Ms. Williams," he asked, his tone professional but neutral. "I'm Lieutenant Hadis. I understand you have some concerns about Officer Thompson." Tasha nodded, her heart beating faster. "Yes, I was pulled over by him a few days ago, and I'm not sure what happened, but something felt wrong. I need to know more about him, his history, his background." Lieutenant Harris studied her for a moment, his face unreadable. "I understand your concerns, but I can't release that kind of information without proper procedure." Tasha felt a wave of frustration rise in her chest. She had expected as much, but that didn't make it any easier to accept. "Is there any way you can help me?" she pressed. "I just need to understand what's going on." Harris hesitated. "There's a process, Ms. Williams, but I can't guarantee anything." The lieutenant's words hung in the air like a challenge. Tasha didn't know what he meant by process, but she knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. She wasn't going to let it be. The next few days were a blur as Tasha worked tirelessly, contacting anyone she could think of who might have information about Jake Thompson. She spoke to colleagues who had worked with him. She scoured online forums for any hint of his past, but nothing concrete surfaced. The more she dug, the more questions arose. Why was there so little information about him? Why did everything about his background seem to be hidden away, out of reach? But then, as if by chance, she stumbled upon something, a small, seemingly innocuous news article about a training program for law enforcement officers. Jake Thompson's name appeared among the list of graduates. It was a standard mention, nothing out of the ordinary. But Tasha's instincts told her there was more to it. She began to investigate further, digging into the program. What she uncovered next would shake her to her core. "I can't believe this." Tasha stared at her screen, her heart pounding as she read through the article again. Jake Thompson's name appeared in a list of law enforcement officers who had completed an advanced training program designed for special operations. It wasn't just any program. It was one that trained officers for highly sensitive and covert missions. The program was known for selecting only the most elite officers from across the country, and it was overseen by a government agency. This wasn't the kind of program that most police officers would ever get the chance to be a part of. It was reserved for those who showed exceptional skill, a level of trustworthiness, and often connections that went far beyond local law enforcement. Tasha's mind raced. She had suspected something was off about Jake, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. He wasn't just a cop. He was someone who had undergone extensive, specialized training, possibly even for covert missions. Why would a man like him be working as a regular patrol officer? What was he doing out on the streets? Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she tried to process the information. Tasha knew she needed to dig deeper. She couldn't just stop here, not when she had uncovered something this significant. She quickly searched for more about the program. What she discovered sent a chill down her spine. This training program was connected to some of the most secretive and high-level operations within the government. The officers who completed it were often tasked with assignments that weren't just about enforcing the law. They were about gathering intelligence, managing classified information, and sometimes operating in environments that required them to keep their true identity hidden. Tasha couldn't shake the thought that Jake's presence in her life wasn't just coincidental. Something in her gut told her that he was more than just an officer doing his job. There had to be a reason why he was in her path. She couldn't ignore the possibility that Jake might have been involved in something far bigger than what he was letting on. She had to find out what it was. That night, she couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned in bed, the weight of the discoveries pressing down on her. She replayed every detail of her encounter with Jake, his cold demeanor, his overly probing questions, the way he seemed to be watching her every move. She wondered if he had been sizing her up, trying to figure out what she knew, or what she could potentially do. As the hours ticked by, Tasha knew one thing for sure. She couldn't let this go. She had to find out more about Jake, about his training, and about what his real motivations were. The next day, she decided to confront him directly. She wasn't going to sit back and wait for answers anymore. If he was hiding something, she was going to find out what it was. She made up her mind to go to the police station again, but this time, she would be more prepared. She had to be. When she arrived, she noticed that the usual atmosphere in the station was different. There were more officers than usual, and the air seemed thick with tension. Something was happening, something she couldn't quite place. As she walked up to the front desk, she felt a familiar sense of unease settle in her chest. She wasn't just going to ask questions this time. She had a feeling that the answers she was about to get were going to change everything. I walked into the police station, my heart pounding in my chest. The usual hum of activity in the lobby was replaced by an uneasy stillness. There were more officers than I had ever seen before, their faces hard and unreadable. The air was thick with tension, like something was about to happen, something big. I approached the front desk, trying to steady my nerves. The receptionist, a woman in her 40s, looked up at me as I approached. Her eyes narrowed slightly as if she recognized me, but she didn't say anything. "I need to speak with Lieutenant Harris," I said, my voice firm. "It's urgent." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Please wait here," she said, her tone strangely cold. I stood in the small waiting area, my mind racing. What was going on? Why did the atmosphere in the station feel so different today? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening, something I wasn't supposed to know about. As I waited, I replayed everything in my mind. The encounter with Jake Thompson, the information I had uncovered about his secret training, the feeling that I was being watched. I couldn't stop thinking about why he had been so interested in me. Why had he been so focused on my every word? The lieutenant had been reluctant to give me any information before, but now I was determined to get answers. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how deep this was going. This wasn't just about a random traffic stop. There was something bigger at play here. A few minutes later, Lieutenant Harris walked into the room. He gave me a nod, his expression unreadable. "Ms. Williams," he said, his voice calm, but with a hint of wariness. "I understand you have more questions about Officer Thompson." I nodded, trying to maintain my composure. "Yes, I need to know more about him, his background, his training. Something doesn't add up, and I think he's hiding something. I need your help." Harris studied me for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if weighing whether to trust me. Finally, he sighed and took a seat across from me. "Look, Ms. Williams," he said quietly, "I can't give you everything. There are rules, procedures. But I can tell you this much. Jake Thompson is not just your average cop. He has a history that goes beyond the police force. He was selected for a special training program a few years back. It's a program that's not publicly known, and it's designed for officers who are involved in high-level operations. It's not something most people would even be aware of." My heart skipped a beat. High-level operations? My instincts had been right all along. There was more to Jake than just being a cop. "What kind of operations?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Harris hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "I can't go into details, but let's just say that the program is connected to some of the most sensitive areas of government work. These officers are trained for things that go beyond law enforcement. They deal with intelligence, classified operations, and even international affairs. It's not something that most officers would ever get involved with." I leaned forward, my curiosity piqued. This was the breakthrough I had been waiting for. "And Jake Thompson? What's his role in all of this?" Harris didn't respond right away. He looked down at his hands, then back at me. "Jake is good at his job. He's smart, capable, but I can't tell you what he's been involved in specifically. All I can say is that the program he was a part of it's not something you just walk away from. It changes people." I was stunned. The pieces were starting to come together, but there were still so many questions. What had Jake been involved in? Why had he been sent to a regular police station when he clearly had ties to something much bigger? As I sat there, trying to process everything, Harris's next words hit me like a punch to the gut. "I can't tell you everything, Ms. Williams," he said quietly, "but I can tell you this. If you dig any deeper into Jake Thompson's past, you might find yourself in danger." The warning hung in the air like a dark cloud, and for the first time, I realized just how deep this went. What had I gotten myself into? The warning from Lieutenant Harris echoed in my mind as I left the police station. If you dig any deeper into Jake Thompson's past, you might find yourself in danger. Those words stayed with me, growing heavier with each step I took away from the building. I wasn't sure if Harris was trying to protect me, or if he was simply telling me that I was about to uncover something I wasn't prepared to handle. But either way, I couldn't stop now. I had already come this far, and the answers I was searching for were more important than my safety. As I sat in my car, my hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. The more I thought about what I had learned, the more questions popped into my mind. What was Jake really involved in? What kind of secret operations had he been a part of? The fact that he had ties to a covert program, something that was kept hidden from the public, only made me more determined to get to the bottom of it. I drove aimlessly for a while, trying to clear my head, but all I could think about was Jake. His strange behavior during our encounter, the way he'd been so focused on me. It wasn't just a routine traffic stop. It had to be something more. I knew that if I didn't act fast, I might lose my chance to get the answers I needed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the training program, about the high-level operations that officers like Jake were involved in. I spent hours scouring the internet, looking for any scrap of information I could find about the program, but most of what I uncovered was vague and unhelpful. There were no details about the operations themselves, only vague references to the program's elite status and the types of assignments its graduates were given. What really bothered me was the secrecy surrounding it. Why was it so hidden? Why wasn't anyone talking about it? The next day, I decided to take a risk. I went back to the place where I had first met Jake, the area where I had been pulled over. I knew it was a long shot, but I hoped that maybe I could find some clue that would lead me to the truth. I parked my car on the side of the street, watching the area closely. As I sat there, my thoughts were interrupted by a familiar figure walking past. It was Jake. He didn't notice me at first, but I recognized him immediately. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt the weight of his presence even from a distance. This time, I was ready. I couldn't let him just walk by without trying to get more information. Without thinking too much, I stepped out of the car and walked toward him. He noticed me as I approached, and his expression changed immediately. There was no warmth in his eyes, just a cold, guarded look that made me feel like I was intruding on something I wasn't supposed to know. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice flat. "I just want to talk," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "About the other day. About the training program. I know. What you're involved in, Jake. I need answers." He looked at me for a moment, as if weighing his options. I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his fists clenched at his sides. It was clear that he was trying to keep his composure, but there was something else behind his eyes, a hint of fear, maybe just a recognition that I was too close to something he didn't want me to know. "You need to walk away," Jake said finally, his voice low. "This is bigger than you, and you don't want to get caught up in it." His words sent a chill down my spine, but I wasn't backing down. "I'm not going anywhere until I get the truth," I said, my voice firm. Jake's eyes darkened, and for a moment, I thought he might say something more. But instead, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. My heart was racing, but I knew I had just gotten closer to the truth. What did he mean by bigger than you? What was he involved in? I wasn't sure, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let this go. Not now, not ever. I couldn't stop thinking about what Jake had said. "This is bigger than you, and you don't want to get caught up in it." His words echoed in my mind as I sat in my car, parked on the side of the street. I watched him disappear into the crowd, his figure swallowed up by the busy street. But I couldn't just let it go. I had come too far to turn back now. If anything, his warning only fueled my determination. The deeper I dug into Jake's background, the more I realized how much was at stake. The things he was involved in, things he clearly didn't want me to know, were dangerous. And if I didn't act soon, I might lose the chance to uncover the truth. I needed to know what bigger than you really meant. Over the next few days, I made a series of calls. I reached out to anyone who might have information on Jake's past, trying to piece together the puzzle. I contacted some of his former colleagues, but none of them would talk. They were all too afraid of the repercussions. It was clear that Jake wasn't just any officer. He was tied to something much darker, something that went far beyond the walls of the police station. But then, just as I was about to give up, I got a lead. One of Jake's old associates, someone who had been part of the same training program, reached out to me anonymously. They told me that Jake's involvement in the program was only the beginning. The real work, if you could call it that, came after the training. They explained that officers like Jake were assigned to covert operations that were so secretive, so classified, that even the highest-ranking officials didn't know the full extent of what was going on. It wasn't just about keeping the peace or enforcing the law. These officers were involved in surveillance, intelligence gathering, and sometimes actions that couldn't be traced back to them. The more I learned, the more it became clear. Jake wasn't just a cop. He was part of something far more powerful, far more dangerous than anything I had imagined. I felt a pit grow in my stomach as I realized that I was getting closer to something that could destroy everything. And yet, the more I uncovered, the more I knew I couldn't stop. I had to keep going. It was like a puzzle, and every new piece I found led me closer to the truth. But I also knew that the closer I got, the more dangerous it became. The information I was digging up was more than just a story. It was a threat, and I was getting too close for comfort. As the days passed, I began to feel the weight of what I was doing. My every move felt like it was being watched. I didn't know who was watching or when they would make their move, but the feeling of being followed, of being a step behind something much bigger, was overwhelming. I tried to stay focused, but the tension was starting to take its toll. One night, as I sat at my desk, staring at the screen, the phone rang. I hesitated before picking it up. "Ms. Williams," a voice on the other end said, low and steady. "You need to stop. You don't know what you're dealing with. You're playing a dangerous game." I froze. The voice was unfamiliar, but there was something in it that sent a chill down my spine. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "You don't need to know. Just know that if you keep digging, you won't be safe. Not for long." And with that, the line went dead. My heart raced. Whoever was behind this knew I was close, and they were making it clear that I was being watched. The warning had never felt more real. But it also made one thing painfully clear. I couldn't stop now. The truth was out there, and I was going to find it, no matter what the cost. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was running out of time. Every moment I spent digging into Jake Thompson's past, the deeper I got into something I wasn't fully prepared for. The anonymous call had confirmed what I feared. I was being watched. The warning couldn't have been clearer. But the more they threatened me, the more determined I became. I couldn't back down now. The truth was too important. I spent the next few days laying low, trying to piece together the last fragments of the puzzle without drawing attention to myself. I knew I was on the edge of something huge, something that could change everything, but I had no idea just how close I was to discovering the truth. I couldn't go to the police anymore. I couldn't trust anyone in uniform. The very system I thought I could rely on was compromised, and the more I uncovered, the more I realized how deep the corruption went. So, I turned to someone I knew I could trust. Mia Turner. She was a journalist I'd met a few years ago at a community event. We had worked on a couple of local stories together, and I knew she was one of the few people who still had integrity in a world full of hidden agendas. I reached out to her, carefully laying out everything I had discovered about Jake and the covert program he was a part of. At first, Mia was hesitant, unsure if she should get involved in something so risky. But after I explained the gravity of the situation and the fact that it was much bigger than just a rogue cop, she agreed to help. We met in secret at a small cafe, away from prying eyes. "This is insane," Mia whispered as I handed her my notes. "But if this is true, then you're right. This goes all the way to the top." Her words sent a chill down my spine. "Exactly," I replied, my voice low. "And the more I uncover, the more I realize how many people are involved." Mia scanned the documents, her brow furrowing as she read through the information. "We need to be careful," she said, looking up from the papers. "If we publish this, there will be consequences. This is dangerous stuff." I nodded, already knowing that I was treading a thin line. "I know, but I can't stop now, Mia. I have to get this out. People need to know what's happening." Mia took a deep breath, her eyes filled with both concern and determination. "Okay," she said finally, "I'm in, but we have to do this carefully. We'll need more than just your notes. We need solid proof, something they can't deny." For the next few days, we worked together, piecing together the story of Jake Thompson, the secret program, and the covert operations that were taking place under the radar. Mia had connections in the media world, and slowly, we began to gather the evidence we needed. We dug through classified documents, spoke to insiders who were willing to talk off the record, and cross-referenced every detail to make sure we had the truth. But as we got closer to the final pieces of the puzzle, the danger became even more apparent. Someone was watching us. We couldn't trace the source, but every time we met or shared information, it felt like we were being followed. I had no doubt that the people behind Jake's operation knew we were getting too close. And it was only a matter of time before they made their move. I couldn't afford to stop now, though. We were so close. We had everything we needed, and soon, the world would know the truth about Jake Thompson and the dark network he was a part of. I just hoped I wasn't too late. I knew the risk I was taking. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to stop, but the weight of everything I had learned was too much to ignore. The truth was just within reach. We had the evidence we needed, and Mia and I were ready to expose everything. Jake Thompson's dark ties to the covert operations, the lies, the corruption, and the people who were orchestrating it all. From the shadows, we spent days working quietly, behind closed doors, compiling documents, gathering testimonies from sources who were brave enough to speak out. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when it felt like the walls were closing in. The more we uncovered, the more I began to feel the danger closing in on me. Someone was watching. I could feel it every time I stepped out of my apartment, every time I walked down the street. The sense of being followed, of being tracked, was undeniable. The silence around me seemed to carry a hidden message. They knew we were getting closer. The phone calls stopped, but the tension remained. I couldn't tell if they were waiting for us to make a mistake or if they were just biding their time. Mia and I were careful, meeting in secret, always keeping a low profile. But the weight of the situation began to take its toll. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't focus on anything else. The truth was consuming me. Every day felt like it was my last chance to get everything out before they closed in. It was around midnight when the phone rang again. I hesitated before picking it up. "Ms. Williams," a voice said, its tone calm but threatening. "You've gone too far." I froze, the voice sounding eerily familiar. "Who is this?" I asked, my pulse quickening. The voice on the other end of the line laughed, a cold, detached sound. "You've been asking too many questions, digging too deep. You're treading on dangerous ground, and now it's time for you to stop. If you don't, there will be consequences." My heart raced, but I forced myself to stay calm. "You're not going to scare me," I said, my voice steady despite the fear that clawed at me. "You can't stop me from telling the truth." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear someone breathing, but they didn't speak again. Finally, the line went dead. I sat there in the darkness, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. They knew. They were coming for me. The weight of their threat hung heavily in the air, but I couldn't let it stop me. I wasn't going to back down. The truth had to come out. The next day, Mia and I finalized everything. We had it. All. Proof, documents, and the testimony of witnesses who were brave enough to speak. We were ready. But as I hit send on the final email, I felt a chill run through me. The story was out there now. There was no turning back, for better or worse. The world was about to know the truth about Jake Thompson and the secret world he was part of. As I sat back, staring at the screen, I couldn't help but wonder, would we be safe once it was out? Or would everything we had uncovered only make us bigger targets? Only time would tell. But I was ready. I had to be.